You're listening to Obsessed with Assessment podcast. Here comes another Assessment in the News episode. The Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study, or TIMSS, has been running since 1995 and is an assessment that captures how a sample cohort of students is performing in maths and science alongside cohorts from other countries. The study tests pupils aged 9 to 10 and pupils aged 13 to 14. So in England, we're looking at learners in years 5 and 9. This assessment is taken every 4 years, and the most recent one was delivered in 2023. A preliminary report on the results was published at the end of last year, but it's this month's report which pulls out some alarming data for England's schools. Initially, everything looked pretty good. The first report indicated that England had maintained high levels in maths over 4 years since 2019 and was performing even more strongly than in 2019 in science. But now, this March, comes the breakdown in pupil characteristics. The boy-girl attainment gap in Year 5 maths pupils is large, but it keeps growing in Year 9, with the 26-point difference being described as statistically significant. And it's the biggest gender gap for any of the participating countries in that 2023 assessment. The same is true in science, with the 14-point gap in Year 9 also being described as statistically significant. My name is Sam Deno, and I am the assessment lead at Twinkle Educational Publishing, and I am joined by a triumvirate of STEM specialists who work for Twinkle, and we're going to discuss what could possibly be going wrong in that gender attainment gap. So we've got Sally Cole, the digital maths content lead, Sapphire McDonald, Beyond Maths content lead, and the podcast's very own Emma Rose McHale, STEM team leader. Welcome to the show, everybody. I found a report from the NFER in 2020 in which they spoke about TIMSS countries' preparedness for online learning when the pandemic hit. And this report said there was considerable variation in technology incorporation across 2019 TIMSS countries, and England was below the international average. Basically, we don't do technology very well. And then on BBC Inside Science last week, Jess Wade said that girls find the transition to digital skills challenging, and that 2023 TIMSS would have been 100% digital for the first time in England. Sally, do you think we're looking at England paying for its slowness to go digital?
I think there's a few different things that are happening with this TIMSS data. Because if it was just a case of us being slow to go digital in England, then why are we seeing the attainment gap between boys and girls? As you pointed out, the 2023 TIMSS assessment was the first year it was in the new digital format. But when we compare the 2023 TIMSS Year 5 data to the Year 6 SATs, this apparent significant gap between girls and boys' attainment actually drops to just 1 percentage point. And so it does look like it is something to do with the assessment itself and maybe the format that it's in. And I'd be really interested to see what's happening in this year's GCSE data to see whether that Year 9 cohort that are now doing their GCSEs this year, whether we will see that disparity between the genders or whether actually the format of the test has skewed that a little bit. But interestingly, if it's something that's affecting pupils in England, it's affecting girls in England much more than boys in terms of have they not are they not getting the digital skills necessary to access these tests, or is it like they are not confident in their digital skills?
I think was so surprising about this is that we've been told for a long time that the trend has been that girls have outperformed boys across the board, like not just in any particular subject, bar maths slightly. So I was looking at the January 2024 report on specifically GCSE data, where girls were outperforming boys, not by necessarily huge differences, huge margins. And boys outperform girls very slightly in maths, but certainly nothing as pronounced as this shows, which I think is interesting when, like you say, when you and Sally both talked about it being the first kind of truly fully digital test.
To me, this feels like a bit of a shock. It feels like in recent years there's been an attempt to raise the profile of female accomplishment in the sciences, female opportunities in STEM. We've been talking that language for I think a few years. Have I got the wrong impression of that? Because actually a widening gap in 2023 seems to paint a different picture.
I think you're correct. I think there has been an active push to have positive female role models in areas that perhaps been dominated by men previously, which obviously includes women in STEM. As Sally and Sapphire know, that that is something we actively promote, as it even just as a phrase, isn't it? Women in STEM. We've got that on the website currently.
Interestingly, the data shows that girls in year 5 have actually got an average point score of 543, which is the same as what they had in 2015. So although their attainment raised slightly, they have gone back to 2015 levels after the pandemic. So it hasn't particularly gone down a huge amount. It's gone down a little bit from 2019. So it's not actually the story that girls are doing worse, I think, than they were previously. It's the story that boys are improving at a quicker rate. And so I think that's maybe a different way to look at it. So what has been brought in the last few years that has helped boys, but it's not helping girls as much. I think maybe that's something that we need to look at.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because of course actually England, like I said in the introduction, England has improved in those. I don't think they want us to think of them as rankings, but they were sort of in the top 20 in 2019. They're now kind of in the top 10 in those if you see them as rankings. But yeah, so that's an interesting idea that actually all of that increase is due to males improving as opposed to females getting worse.
Before we came on here, we were talking about public attitudes towards maths, and maybe that's something that we could look at a little bit further now, because when Rishi Sunak announced that he wanted to extend the teaching of mathematics to 18 for everyone, there was quite a lot of public backlash against that. And a lot of that came from the arts, because it was pitted against, it was almost like, well, there are arts people and there are mathematical people. And have heard this a lot. And I also think there is a general attitude in this country to be like, it's okay to be bad at maths, or it's almost seen as a badge of honor in some ways, or spoken about, that, oh well, I'm no good at maths. Actually, like, there's some research by Jo Bowler that states that research tells us that when mothers tell their daughters that they were no good at maths in school, their daughter's achievement immediately goes down that term. And so if women are confidently saying to their daughters, don't worry, oh, if they're learning at home because of the pandemic, don't worry, I couldn't get my head around times tables at school. Well, then their child might internalize that, and actually that could affect their performance. So there is something I think we do need to talk, and it's a wider societal issue that goes further than teaching, but it's about how we talk about maths. Because for me, I did a degree in actually a creative subject. I've always loved maths, but I went to art school, and I've never seen them having to be pitted against each other. Like, problem solving it underpins all creative industries, and it's really critical in mathematics. But I think what happens a lot is that people see maths as this kind of quick recall of facts, regurgitating algorithms, and we know that girls do not like that performance style of maths. I mean, so that is very broad, but like it girls tend research shows that girls tend to enjoy understanding why and how, and when they do understand why and how, they feel more confident in the maths that they're doing, and therefore they perform better. And we know that maths attainment is very much linked to confidence. Girls do not feel confident if they don't understand the why and how, whereas boys don't seem, as the research shows, don't seem to be so worried about knowing the why and how. They just want to be getting the answer correct, and if they're getting their answer correct, they get the dopamine hit, and they're enjoying the maths.
Well, we're talking specifically about boys and girls in the classroom. If anybody's taught year 6, they'll know the shift that happens after SATs. You go to like things that are slightly more pleasant to do, a little bit more interesting. And one of the things we always did in our school was they basically designed a theme park for a few weeks, and it was all problem solving. People have done it. It's a classic. It's all different kinds of problem solving, all different areas of maths. So like there's budgeting, but there's also kind of like actually planning something out in terms of shape and space, and I would find that the amount of time that girls would spend on that, really enjoying it and trying to work it out, it was so much, they would just give so much more to it in terms of time and concentration than even perhaps my best performing in terms of maths boys would do. Like they just wanted to do the project and then be like, I'm done, thanks. Whereas the girls will be like, I want mine to be successful and I want to make this the biggest profit I can and make it a nice layout. And it's interesting that, like you say, Sally's just saying about sometimes the problem solving aspect can be slightly more geared towards girls. So, and I think this is probably the question we've asked a million times, Sam, in other podcasts, but like, what are we actually assessing? Are we assessing skills that might fit male students more?
Yeah.
But yeah, I was wondering if Sapphire had maybe a similar experience in secondary of girls kind of accessing that stuff more, as Sally said.
Yeah, certainly when I was ahead of maths, we tried to do some of those kinds of projects. So within our MAT, we had a couple of secondary schools, and we did like a young enterprise type project where we got sort of a mixture of boys and girls from the 3 schools to basically like create a product. And again, we got some people from the local area, from local businesses, to come in and judge it. And yeah, I noticed that in particular, what we tried to do when we picked sort of the students to take part was those shy girls that would just quite happily sit and say, yeah, I'm absolutely fine, but wouldn't necessarily kind of explain when they weren't okay with things. And it was really what I noticed with those students, those are the ones that shone through in those situations where they had to sort of lead a team and come up with a problem and how are they going to solve that problem and sort of driving the maths behind it. So yeah, I've definitely, from what I've seen, similar sorts of students, but girls in particular, they seem to be the ones that thrive in those situations. But I think when we were, obviously with the curriculum review interim report coming out, and it talking about the sort of the breadth of I say the breadth of the curriculum, but more how much is within the curriculum. We certainly, from my experience of secondary, is that we almost lose those opportunities unless we sort of deliberately shoehorn them in, because there is so much that has to be covered, and there's such an emphasis on getting as much content delivered as possible so that they are ready to do their exam at the end of year 11, that those opportunities that actually we should be capitalising on to get girls into doing maths and see the value in it, I think are being lost potentially.
That's really interesting. If I were to steer us around then to sort of key takeaways for teachers and based on this conversation, what you're talking about there, Sapphire, is we don't have control over kind of curriculum decisions and whether or not we build in more problem-solving style assessment or whatever. But is there anything that teachers can be doing in the short term on a day-to-day classroom level that would go some way to improving this situation.
I think there is a misconception sometimes by teachers that engagement or enjoyment must be about making things competitive. So I know that I used to teach students, for example, those people who might have heard of Kahoot, which is like an online quiz platform. Students were like, particularly boys, really, really wanted every lesson, can we do a Kahoot about this topic? Because it meant that they could show off what they knew and sort of boast to their friends. But actually, that doesn't necessarily, and not necessarily even talking about girls, not everybody engages in that way. And I think it's important to realise that it's okay to have those elements, but actually what we want in a classroom is for that culture of mistakes are okay as well. Like, it's okay to make mistakes. And certainly from some girls that I've got a few girls in my mind that I can think of that I used to teach, that it was almost, if it wasn't perfect, it wasn't acceptable. And so actually, given that the culture that mistakes are okay, and that actually maths can be messy, is what the phrase I would use, that it doesn't have to be an exact, you think of a concept and you get the answer straight away. It can be a messy process to get there, and sort of encouraging that and building that culture into our classrooms, whether that be us emulating that as teachers. So when we're going through a problem on the board, we're sort of describing our thinking as we're going through. But also when we are giving students the opportunity to show us what they know, when they're trying to do their stuff on mini whiteboards, for example, is actually saying, what you'll put down everything that you think, and give students the opportunity to be messy before they come up with a final answer. And I think having that culture can make a big difference to kind of changing that mindset that, particularly, again, I could be sort of speculating, but for girls in particular, that it doesn't have to be perfection.
The first school I taught at, we used to talk about mistakes as juicy mistakes, because they're juicy, they're full of like juicy learning goodness. And I took that with me to my next school because I just love it so much. It's like, oh, you've made a juicy mistake, and it'll be like, you've made one of those misconceptions that actually we'll all stop and we can all learn from it. And thank you so much for making that mistake, because that's helped us all. The other thing that I would really advocate for is sort of encouraging parent collaboration. And I don't know whether that's easier in a primary school setting than in a secondary school setting, but I used to, as maths lead, and this is maybe slightly more outside the classroom, but as a maths lead I used to invite parents in to do maths workshops with them. I always used to share that research from Jo Boaler about, try and be confident about maths, even if you don't understand the way that your child's learning. Ask them questions about it, and learn from them what the strategy that they've learned, rather than going, oh well, that's not how I was taught it, so I don't know how to help you. But actually, like, listen, and maybe you might understand. And then the other thing is, like, because maths is being taught in a different way, share with parents how you're teaching maths, so that they can get on board with it. And just you can also do workshops that can improve adults' confidence in maths, because we know adult numeracy levels in this country are not great, and it does instill fear into many people. So some big banks actually do workshops in schools for parents. So doing something like that can be really positive. And then the last thing is like doing like sort of a maths immersion day or week, where you can really show like go off schedule a little bit, show the creativity in maths. I know there's like some companies do things called like Festival of Triangles, and you can just really like get creative with the problem solving in maths on that day, even if you are tight on your curriculum and struggling to get problem solving into your day-to-day teaching all the time. Like, just coming off one day and doing those sort of topics, like you said, Emma, sort of doing those sort of theme park topics, you can pull them into the summer term. Just like, getting a bit of creativity in maths, I think, goes a long way.
The same goes for science as well. So I think one of my things I would want people to think about is, and we talked about making sure we were raising the profile of female accomplishment in STEM subjects. Absolutely keep doing that. Representation matters. Still have that as a key takeaway. And I think that includes as well on the other side of the coin. So as much as we're showing girls, we want to show girls in STEM subjects, we also want to show boys doing things that are more creative, that they might have been told aren't necessarily dominated by men, which I think are important too. I'd also, and I know I've said it already, and we've said it in loads of other podcasts, like, work out what you're actually assessing. So like it is your formative assessment, quickfire arithmetic on boards, because that may well be more suited to how boys are learning, or are you doing something a little bit more interesting that might include the whole of the class?
I think we've solved the gender gap.
It's done now. The next set of data analysis will be like, well, thanks to that podcast.
Let's see what those GCSEs say, hey?
Yes, yeah. So watch this space. So that is 2025 GCSE results.
Are the year 9s for 2023, yeah.
Yep, keep an eye on that. Maybe there'll be another podcast then. Who knows? That is all we've got time for. So thank you, Sally, thank you, Sapphire, and thank you, Emma, for joining me. You can get in touch. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are as well on this subject, and you can get in touch with the podcast on assessment@twinkle.co.uk, and you can like and subscribe.
And please do go check out our website to see our own Women in STEM resources.
Yes, 100%. Thanks for listening. Goodbye for now.
Bye.
Bye.